Gildan Media, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Practical Guide to Critical Thinking, Deciding What to Do and Believe, 2nd edition, by David A. Hunter. Narrated by Tristan Morris. Note to instructors. Teaching students to think critically is more about imparting a set of skills and habits than about teaching bits of theory. In developing this textbook, I tried to incorporate several features that I thought would make teaching critical thinking both easier and more effective. Most significantly, I steered clear of any formal notation, aside from the very simplest. It is not that I doubt the value of learning formal logic. In fact, I think that many students thrive while studying it. But in my experience, there is so much that most students need to learn before they can see the value of mastering a formal system, and so much more benefit they can derive from a non-formal approach to critical thinking. Instead, I tried to think of this text as like an introduction to practical or applied epistemology, offering systematic advice and lots of practice on the best way to go about deciding what to believe and what to do. It is worth noting here that I treat what is sometimes called enumerative induction as a form of reasoning by analogy. It seems to me that using samples to draw a conclusion about an entire group or population just is reasoning by analogy, and that it can be usefully taught as such. I also say, and this perhaps is more controversial, that reasoning by analogy can be valid. Of course, I do not mean that it is formally valid in the way that modus ponens is formally valid. Reasoning is valid when it is not possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. The fact that some reasoning can be known to be valid just from its form alone is, of course, important, and I discuss some of these forms in Chapter 5 and 6. But it is important to keep in mind that not all valid arguments are formally valid, e.g., the table is blue, therefore it is colored, and not all arguments that are formally invalid are really invalid, e.g., if Jones is a male, then he is a bachelor. Jones is a bachelor, so Jones is a male. Judgment is always needed, it seems to me, in assessing the strength of a piece of reasoning, and this judgment is better taught by focusing on the idea of validity itself. I also think that what I say in Chapter 6 makes a reasonable and pedagogically responsible case for my view that reasoning by analogy can be valid. I had originally planned to dedicate a chapter to thinking critically about what to do, but I worried that much of it would simply repeat points that had been made earlier, and in so doing would make deciding what to do seem a lesser cousin to deciding what to believe. As I worked, and then reworked, the first 6 chapters, it seemed to me that I could elegantly discuss deciding what to do as we went along, when the topic at hand seemed relevant. The book includes several special excerpts as well. Some identify important mistakes that a good critical thinker ought to avoid. Some provide summaries of the discussions in the body of the text. Some offer examples of critical thinking across the curriculum. Some offer practical tips and rules of thumb. All are intended to make the text more understandable and the concepts and skills more accessible. I also decided that rather than dedicate a chapter to informal fallacies, I would discuss them in what struck me as their proper context. It seemed to me that there is no easy way to organize the different kinds of mistakes into a small number of categories without distorting their differences or exaggerating their similarities. Some of the mistakes have to do with clarifying meaning, others with ascribing views to others, some with assessing evidence, others with assessing validity. Several mistakes can occur at several otherwise quite distinct stages in deciding what to do or to believe. Rather than try to force the various mistakes into artificial categories, it seems to me better to discuss them as we went along. For easy reference, though, I have collected them all in an appendix at the end of the book. Careful training and repeated practice are crucial to learning any skill, and critical thinking is no exception. I've tried to include a large and varied collection of exercises, but I strongly encourage you to bring your own exercises to class, and to encourage your students to seek out arguments and reasoning to share during the class time. In my experience, students learn far more when they are required during class time to participate in the construction, analysis, and assessment of examples of reasoning about what to do or believe. I have included, at the end of most of the chapters, exercises that are specially designed to help students transfer the concepts and skills they are learning to other corners of their lives. My thought is simply that there is little point in teaching someone to think critically if they see no place for it at home, in their own discipline, or at work. Over the years, I have experimented with all of these exercises, making adjustments as I went along. The exercises are in a form that I find to be both effective and not overly intrusive, but I encourage you to adjust, alter, add, subtract, and modify as you see fit. The important thing is to find ways to help students see that they are learning skills and concepts that have application and value after the final exam. 1. The nature and value of critical thinking. This book is a practical guide to critical thinking. It might seem unnecessary to be listening to a guide to something you do all the time and are probably already pretty good at. When I tell people that I am writing a book on critical thinking, they sometimes tell me that they consider themselves to be very good critical thinkers. At the very least, they say that they consider critical thinking to be very important. I am sure that they are right on both counts. We think critically a good bit of the time, and on the whole, we do it pretty well. Still, I think there is always something to learn from thinking hard about what one is already good at. In this chapter, we will explore the nature and value of critical thinking. We will ask what critical thinking is, and how it differs from other kinds of thinking. We will explore what it means to think critically, what makes that kind of thinking critical. As part of this, we will consider whether critical thinking varies from one discipline to the next. Is critical thinking in geology different from critical thinking in design or in humanities? We will see that while the concepts, methods, and standards may differ from one discipline to the next, there is a basic essence or core of critical thinking that remains the same across all disciplines. Whether one is doing chemistry, design, astrology, or philosophy, there are common standards that you should strive to maintain, and practical strategies to help you make sure that you do. This book is designed to introduce you to this essential core of critical thinking, while at the same time providing you with the tools you need to identify the concepts, methods, and standards distinctive of different disciplines. Once we have said what we mean by critical thinking, we can then ask what place this kind of thinking does or should occupy in our daily lives, both in and out of the classroom. When is it appropriate to think critically? And are there some parts of our lives where critical thinking tends to dominate, or where it tends to be ignored? We will see that critical thinking is appropriate whenever we are trying to decide what we ought to believe about some matter of fact, or whenever we are trying to decide what to do or what course of action to adopt. In short, critical thinking is needed whenever we reason about what to believe or what to do. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, we will ask why being a critical thinker matters. What makes critical thinking valuable? Why should we engage in it? We will see that being a critical thinker is valuable for several reasons. Perhaps most obviously, thinking critically about a question or problem can help one get the right answer or solution. By thinking critically about what to believe or what to do, we increase our chances that our beliefs will be true and our actions effective. Thinking critically may not guarantee that you get the right answer, but a good case can be made that unless you think critically, you will get the right answer only by luck, and relying on luck is not a wise policy. But critical thinking has a deeper value than just its ties to truth. Critical thinking is also closely tied to one variety of freedom. By thinking critically, one can make up one's own mind, and making up one's own mind is essential if we are to be the master of our own lives. Critical thinking, we will see, is essential to personal autonomy. 1.1. The nature of critical thinking. There are many definitions for critical thinking, but Robert Ennis, one of the leading researchers on critical thinking, offered the following definition many years ago, and it remains to my mind the best of the bunch. Critical thinking is reasonable, reflective thinking that is aimed at deciding what to believe or what to do. We can see that there are several elements to this definition, so let us look at them one at a time, starting with the last one. Critical thinking is the thinking that is aimed at deciding what to believe or what to do. Deciding what to believe is a matter of deciding what the facts are, figuring out what the world is like, or at least what some little corner of it is like. We make these kinds of decisions when we decide whether it is raining out or sunny, whether the Blue Jays stand a chance this year, whether the kids will put up with another meal of macaroni and cheese, whether the movie was as good as its billing. whether the restaurant has gotten better over the years, or whether we should trust what our teachers tell us. In deciding what to believe on some matter, we take a stand on it. If it is a decision on a factual matter, like the decision about the weather or about the Blue Jays, then we take a stand on what the facts are. If it is a decision on an evaluative matter, like the one about the movie or the restaurant, then in deciding what to believe, we are taking a stand on what is good or better. In either kind of case, critical thinking is aimed at helping us to make those kinds of decisions about what to believe. Critical thinking is reasonable, reflective thinking that is aimed at deciding what to believe or what to do. Deciding what to believe involves reasoning about what the facts are. This is theoretical reasoning. Critical thinking is also aimed at decisions about what to do. Deciding what to do really has two parts. First, one has to decide what to value or to strive for. This is a matter of deciding on one's goal or end. Then, one has to decide how best to achieve that end. This is a matter of deciding on the best means to that end. Should I go for a run now or keep working on my book? Should I spend my savings on a new car or continue using my beat-up one? Should the city spend its limited resources on building a new bridge? Should the country move toward a universal health care plan? Should I tell the truth when my friend asks me about her boyfriend? Should I give to charities? Usually we decide what to do on the basis of what we already value or on what we already think makes for a good life. I decide to go for a run instead of continuing to work on this book because I feel that running and staying in shape is an important part of my life. I decide to tell the truth to my friend about her new car because I value honesty in my friends and want them to consider me trustworthy. But sometimes, deciding what to strive for or what goals to pursue requires first deciding what one will value, what kind of person one wants to be, and what kind of life one wants to lead. In deciding whether to pursue graduate school in philosophy, I had to make a decision about what to value, about what kind of shape I wanted my life to take. Decisions about what to value are among the most difficult and profound decisions we can make. Critical thinking can help us to make these kinds of decisions. But once we make them, once we decide what we want our life to be like, we still need to decide what the best way is to make our life that way. Once we choose the ends, we still need to decide on the means. Here, too, critical thinking can help. Deciding what to do involves reasoning about what to do and how to do it. This is practical reasoning. According to Robert Ennis's definition, critical thinking is reasonable thinking. This is so in several respects. First, critical thinking is reasonable thinking because it is sensitive to methods and standards. If we are trying to decide what to make for dinner, or whether the Blue Jays stand a chance this year, there are various methods we should use and standards we should keep in mind. If we try to make up our minds on these topics without relying on those methods or respecting these standards, then we will fail to be thinking critically about the topic. Part of what makes critical thinking critical is that it is governed by rules and methods. This does not mean that there is no room in critical thinking for reasonable judgment and flexibility. In fact, as we will see in a moment, part of what makes critical thinking different from other kinds of thinking, such as arithmetical calculation, is that there is usually plenty of room for judgment and a case-by-case flexibility. Still, it is essential to critical thinking that in thinking critically about what to believe or do, we rely on methods that are subject to standards. We will spend lots of time in the following chapters learning what these methods and standards are. Critical thinking is reasonable thinking because it is governed by general methods and standards, and because it demands that we have good reasons for our decisions. Critical thinking is reasonable in another and deeper sense. Critical thinking about what to believe or what to do is reasonable in that it demands that we have reasons, and good ones, for the decisions we make. The aim of critical thinking is not simply to make a decision on what the facts are, or in what to strive for. In a way, it is easy to make such decisions. What is hard is having good reasons for the decisions we make. It is not enough to decide to believe that it is sunny out. One has to have a good reason to decide this. Likewise, it is not enough to just decide to value honesty or justice. One has to have good reasons for this decision. So critical thinking is reasonable in that it demands that we have reasons, and good ones, for making the decisions we do. We will be spending a lot of time in what follows exploring what makes something a good reason to believe or do something. Critical thinking is reflective because it involves thinking about a problem at several different levels, or from several different angles all at once, and because it sometimes requires thinking about what the right method is to answer or solve some problem. Finally, Ennis says that critical thinking is reflective. We can see what he has in mind if we contrast critical thinking with arithmetical calculation. There is no doubt that calculating the square root of a large number is a kind of thinking, and no doubt that it is a thinking that is sensitive to methods and standards. In this respect, arithmetical calculation is like critical thinking. But when one calculates a number's square root, one does not need to think about the methods one is using. One simply uses the formula to get the right answer. In this kind of case, the problem at hand, finding the number's square root, is pretty straightforward. It is perfectly clear from the beginning what is to count as the right answer and what the best means is of finding it. The same is true for many kinds of decisions we make in our daily lives. But some problems are open-ended. A problem is open-ended when it is not clear from the outset what would count as a solution to it. In such cases, progress may require thinking hard about the problem itself, and not just calculating an answer to it. To solve it, we may need to analyze the problem into parts, and we may need to think about the best method to use to find a solution. And while we employ that method, we may need to be thinking about whether we are employing it correctly. We may even need to adjust the method, or even develop one from scratch. I will have more to say later about open-ended problems, and no doubt the line between straightforward ones and open-ended ones is not hard and sharp. Calculating a square root the first few times requires a good deal of reflection, even when one does have the formula, and deciding whether it is raining or sunny is usually as straightforward as looking out the window. Still, the contrast should be clear. Critical thinking is reflective, in the sense that it involves thinking about a problem at several different levels, or from several different angles all at once, including thinking about what the right method is for answering or solving the problem. One of the chief virtues of this definition is that it does not restrict critical thinking to the study of arguments. An argument is a series of statements, some of which, the premises, are meant to provide logical support for another, the conclusion. Because we can and often do formulate our reasons for believing or doing something in the form of an argument, critical thinking is surely concerned with arguments. In later chapters, we will discuss some strategies and standards for analyzing and evaluating arguments. But the notion of an argument does not always fit naturally across the curriculum. It is hard to see how reasoning about experimental design, or about statistical sampling, fits the paradigm of an argument. What is more, evaluating reasons for believing something involves assessing their acceptability and their meaning, and neither of these tasks is ordinarily considered augmentation. It is, of course, possible to stretch the ordinary concept of an argument, or of argument analysis, to include all these different aspects of critical thinking, but this definition captures them all without artificially extending our ordinary words. Exercise 1. A. Comprehension questions. When you answer these questions, pretend that you are explaining or teaching the answer to a friend who is not in the class. Doing that will force you to put in lots more background information than you would if you were trying to explain the material to your teacher. Sub A. In what sense is critical thinking reflective? Sub B. What makes critical thinking a reasonable thinking? Sub C. Why is simple arithmetical calculation not a kind of critical thinking? Sub D. Does critical thinking have to be critical in the sense of being negative or skeptical? Explain, using an example. B. Which of the following activities involves critical thinking? If an activity does not involve critical thinking, identify which element in critical thinking is missing. Sub A. Riding a bike. Sub B. Watching the news on TV. Sub C. Doing laundry. Sub D. Ordering coffee at a local coffee shop. Sub E. Planning a vacation. C. Identify 5 activities you do on a daily basis that do not involve critical thinking. Identify 2 to 3 activities that you do on a daily basis that would be improved by thinking critically about them, and explain how thinking critically would improve it. D. Now that you know what critical thinking is, List 5 reasons why it is good to think critically. E. List 5 possible obstacles to thinking critically. Describe one strategy for overcoming each obstacle. 1.2. Critical thinking and knowledge. We have been discussing what critical thinking is, but why is it important? Why does it matter whether or not we think critically when we decide what to believe or what to do? The answer is that critical thinking is valuable for 2 main reasons. First, thinking critically increases our chances of gaining knowledge, and knowledge is valuable. Second, thinking critically is essential to making up one's own mind about what to believe or what to do, which is essential to being autonomous, and being autonomous is valuable. We will start by discussing knowledge and then turn to autonomy. Critical thinking aims at knowledge. We don't just want to have opinions about what is true or about what to do. We want to know what's true and what to do. We have seen that critical thinking is thinking that is aimed at deciding what to believe or to do. But ideally, we want more than just to have an opinion about the facts. We want to know what they are. When we check the weather, our goal is not just to reach a decision about whether it is sunny or not. We want to come to know whether it is sunny or not. We want to know whether the city ought to spend its scarce resources on building a new bridge. We want to know whether HIV causes AIDS all by itself or only in conjunction with other factors. So critically thinking is really aimed at knowledge. But what is knowledge? What is it to know something? By answering these questions, we can get quite a bit clearer on what critical thinking is and why it is valuable. Exercise 2. We can start with an exercise. Make a chart with 3 columns as follows. In the first column, list things that we, either individually or as humans in general, know for a fact. These can be particular facts or kinds of things. In the second column, list things that we can know, but currently do not know. In the third column, list things that we do not know and probably cannot ever know about. The more variety you can provide in each list, the better. Include something in one of the columns only if you are fairly sure that everyone else in your class would also include it in that column. This will avoid controversy from the start. When you have the knowledge chart completed, compare the items in the first and second column and try to identify the relevant differences. What is lacking in the items in the second column that prevents their being in the first column? The traditional definition of knowledge developed by philosophers says that knowledge is justified, true belief. According to this definition, there are 3 elements to knowledge. We can look at each in turn. Then we will ask how the 3 elements are related to one another. Let us start with truth. Knowledge is justified, true belief. 1.3. Knowledge and truth. It would be ideal at this point in our discussion to provide a clear and precise definition of truth. I do not mean just a listing of all the truths that there are, though such a list would be valuable. We already know some of what such a list would include. It would have to include the truths that George Bush was the 42nd President of the United States, that a virus causes the flu, and that the Earth orbits the Sun. And we know what things we should leave off that list, that fish are birds, that 2 + 2 = 27, and that George Washington was the President of France. It would probably be impossible, or at least really hard, to make a complete list of all the truths. But even if we could, making such a list would not be the same as giving a definition of truth. Think of an analogy. Suppose we made a list of all the people there are, or even of all the humans that have ever existed. That list would not be a definition of human nature. It would not tell us anything about what it is to be a human. To know what it is to be human, we would have to say what all humans have in common, and what makes humans different from every other species. Likewise, a list of all the truths would not tell us what it is for something to be true. It would not reveal the nature of truth. To give a definition of truth, we would have to say what it is for something to be true. We would need to say in a general sort of way that would apply to every case what makes something true. I do not have any idea how to do this, nor do I think does anyone else. Or rather, the only plausible definition that I know of is not very helpful. A statement is true just in case it corresponds with the facts. This is not that helpful. because the notion of corresponding with the facts is not much clearer than the notion of truth itself. Thankfully, though, we do not really need a definition of truth. For our purposes, it will be enough to contrast three attitudes we might take to some subject matter: realism, relativism, and nihilism. 1.3.1 Realism, Relativism, and Nihilism. Imagine that there is a large jar of jelly beans on a table in front of you, and that you and your friends have to guess the number of jelly beans it contains. Suppose that Ezra guesses that there are 13,451 beans in the jar, and that Ahmed guesses that there are 11,587 beans in it. Neither one really knows for sure how many beans are in the jar. They are just guessing. But now, here is a philosophical question. Is there a fact about the number of beans in the jar? We know that Ezra and Ahmed have different opinions about the number of beans in the jar. But is there a right answer? Is there a fact of the matter? We can ask this same question for any subject matter, not just the number of jelly beans in a jar. In this section, we will consider three answers one might give to it. Suppose that Rachel looks at the jar of beans and says this: "Well, I am not sure how many beans are in the jar, but I know that there is a right answer. Maybe Ezra is right, maybe Ahmed is right, maybe neither one is right, but there is a single right answer." If Rachel really believes this, then she is a realist about the number of beans in the jar. A realist about a certain subject matter thinks, 1, that there are truths about that subject matter, and 2, that what those truths are is independent of what anybody thinks they are. For the realist, truth is simply out there. A realist about a subject matter thinks that 1, there are truths about that subject matter, and 2, that what those truths are is independent of what anybody thinks they are. Because a realist thinks that truth is independent of our beliefs, she also thinks that it is possible, even if it is highly unlikely, that we could all be totally mistaken about or ignorant of the facts in that subject area. She might even think that some facts are just beyond our understanding, that no matter how hard we try or for how long, we simply could not come to know them. Of course, being a realist does not mean that we have to be skeptical or doubtful about whether we do know anything about the subject matter. One can be a realist about a subject matter and still be quite confident that we know a lot about it. Being a realist simply requires thinking that the facts in that subject area are not determined by or dependent on our beliefs about them. They are what they are, regardless of what we might think that they are. Suppose now that Rebecca looks at the jar of jelly beans and says this: "There is no single right answer about how many beans there are in that jar. It all depends. It is true for Ezra that there are 13,451 beans in the jar, and it is true for Ahmed that there are 11,587 beans in it. But there is no such thing as the single, unique truth." If Rebecca really believed this, then she would be a relativist about the number of beans in the jar. A relativist about some subject matter holds that 1, there are truths about that area, but 2, that what they are depends, in some way or other, on what we, or someone, takes those truths to be. The relativist and the realist agree that there are truths or facts of the matter in that area, but they differ over how those truths or facts are related to our beliefs about them. The relativist insists that those facts are what they are because of our beliefs about them, whereas the realist insists that our beliefs have no bearing at all on the facts themselves. The relativist maintains that had our beliefs or our natures been different, then the facts might have been different too. The facts somehow depend on us. This means that on a relativist's view of some subject matter, it is in a certain way impossible for us to be wrong or ignorant of the facts in that area, since our beliefs about what the facts are is at least part of what makes them the facts. We cannot go too far wrong in trying to know that subject matter, because we play an essential role in making the subject what it is. A relativist about a subject matter thinks that 1, there are truths about that subject, but 2, that what they are depends on what we, or someone, believe that they are. There are different versions of relativism, differing in terms of whose beliefs play the role of determining what the facts are. A subjective relativist about some topic thinks that the truth in that subject matter is whatever any one individual takes it to be. She might express this idea by saying things like, "Well, that might be true for you, but it is not true for me. A social relativist, by contrast, holds that the truth in that
Sample complete. Ready to continue?